West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
One of the most prominent voices on the far right made alarming comments over the weekend about the attack on the Capitol.
And by the way, not just one of the most outspoken voices on the far right, but also one of Kevin McCarthy's closest allies. She's emerged as one of Kevin McCarthy's closest allies in him getting the speakership.
Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene gave a speech at the New York Young Republican Club on Saturday night. She brought up a number of topics, some of them very disgusting and pornographic, and then the topic of January 6th and past accusations that she gave Capitol tours to Donald Trump's supporters in the days leading up to the insurrection. Greene then reportedly said, quote, "Then January 6th happened, and next thing you know, I organized the whole thing along with Steve Bannon." Greene went on to say, "I will tell you something. If Steve Bannon and I organized that, we would have won. Not to mention it would have been armed." As Joe said, her comments matter because of her influence with the ultra-conservative Freedom Caucus and the group's ability to block Kevin McCarthy's bid to become Speaker of the House.
Well, and as Jonathan O'Meara, as you were talking about earlier at the end of your show, Axios is reporting that she has been working very closely with Kevin McCarthy. And she is now one of Kevin McCarthy's most important allies in becoming Speaker. And this is a woman who had said, you know, if she had been in charge of the January 6th riots, they would have won and they would have been armed. That's Kevin McCarthy's Republican Party.
One of McCarthy's top lieutenants. McCarthy has made a play to the far right of the Republican House caucus since January 6th, since he condemned briefly Donald Trump, and he has realized he needs to curry favor with the right, in part in order to make sure that Donald Trump is still on his side to support his speakership bid. So he has spent now nearly 2 years trying to downplay some of the terrible things the extremists have said, to not punish them when obvious other leaders would have doled out stripped committee assignments or punished Republican members for saying or doing some of the things they did. Instead, he has placated them, he has wooed them, he has courted them because he knows he needs their support. And Marjorie Taylor Greene damn well knows that. And she knows that she's got a lot of power coming in right now. She's trying to garner support for McCarthy to get him across the finish line to become Speaker. And he is going to owe her greatly. If he becomes Speaker, he will be in her debt and her power will only increase. And that, what we just heard, those terrible remarks, that will be given a place of prominence within the Republican Party as it takes control of the House in a matter of weeks.
We've got a great group to talk about all of this. MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle joins us, former chief of staff to the DCCC, Adrian Elrod, and former aide to House Speaker Paul Ryan and House Speaker John Boehner, Brendan Buck. He's now an MSNBC political analyst. Good to have you all on board this morning.
So, Brendan, you know a bit about House leadership races and the deals that people make and sometimes the deals that people walk away from. Kevin McCarthy is now staking his speakership on a woman who this past weekend said that if she were in charge of the January 6th riots, that her side would have won and they would have been armed. How does that define Kevin McCarthy moving forward if he continues to cozy up to somebody who's talking about an armed insurrection?
Yeah, you got to go back and look at the fact that Kevin McCarthy was inches away from being Speaker in 2015, had it taken away from him by the Freedom Caucus, and he has vowed that he's not going to let that happen again. And obviously, it's the far right that is threatening him. And so he needs somebody to go in there and basically, you're talking about envoys. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is his envoy to these people on the far right. And his strategy, basically from the beginning, was give them anything they want. My jaw dropped. I remember thinking about when he named Jim Jordan to be on the Intelligence Committee, if you remember, during impeachment. Jim Jordan is now the chairman, or going to be the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to get her committees back. He doesn't really have any other path forward other than giving them what they want. Now, they're going to make a bunch of demands, but basically his argument is, I've given you everything. There's nothing else that you can ask from me, and hope that the rest of the conference loses patience with them.
Now, you know, Mike Barnicle, it wasn't so long ago that Steve King had all of his committee assignments taken away from him by Republicans for saying things that actually look very mild compared to what Marjorie Taylor Greene said this weekend. And again, here's somebody talking about an insurrection and talking about how it should have been armed.
You know, Joe, there seems to be a consensus that Kevin McCarthy is of limited ability. And he has made so many deals thus far. Just listening to Brendan reminded me of this. He's made so many deals thus far over the past 3 or 4 years in his pursuit of becoming Speaker that he can no longer remember what deals he made. If you want to know the future of the Republican Party, as you were discussing quite articulately last hour, take a look at the cover of the New York Post this morning. Eyes on the spies. And it's the Republicans' intention, Kevin McCarthy's intention, to subpoena 51 former members of the American intelligence community to pursue the Hunter Biden story. So if you're out there sitting at home, worried about your home heating oil bill, your grocery bill, the status of your kids in school, forget about that, because we've got to get to the bottom of the Hunter Biden story. We've got to cut Clapper and Brennan in and find out why they lied.
Yeah, no,
we've seen this before, where they go after Joe Biden's remaining son. You know, that people like Joe Biden. We've gone through this. Haven't we gone through this?
The thing is, let the chips fall where they may. If Hunter Biden has done anything wrong, the DOJ's investigating him. Let the chips fall where they may.
Not saying
but
that.
This singular obsession, though, as I've said before, they're in a bubble. And it causes them to lose. Now, as everybody knows, the New York Post, it's the official paper of Morning Joe. So I don't ever speak ill of the New York Post. I will say they got way ahead of themselves on Durham's hilariously bad investigation. Just like the Wall Street Journal had some op-ed writers got it way ahead. Every time they go down this path and they want to investigate the investigators. They want to attack the FBI. They want to attack the CIA. They want to attack the intel community. It never pays off for them. And Jen, if you look at this, the obsession among these House Republicans on Hunter Biden's laptop, the obsession on Twitter, Adrian, the obsession on January 6th, because they think we're treating the rioters, the insurrectionists, the terrorists too tough. And then you've got one of the most important players in getting Kevin McCarthy the speakership saying her regret is that they didn't bring guns to the insurrection. I mean, again, this is just proving my point. Republicans are in a bubble. They're going to keep losing elections because they're not talking about inflation. They're not talking about healthcare costs going up. They're not talking about how hard it is for first-time home buyers to get a house. They're not talking about the kitchen table items that matter the most to Americans who decide elections.
Yeah, Joe, you're exactly right. I mean, newsflash to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kevin McCarthy, the tactics that you've been using, the rhetoric that you've been espousing over the past 2 years, over the past 6 years, has not been working. Joe, you've talked about this time and time again on this show. Republicans have lost consecutively since 2016. Every cycle has gotten worse and worse and worse from them. 2022 was not a good midterm cycle for them at all, historically a bad midterm cycle, and it doesn't seem like they're getting the memo. I mean, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene using this crazy, divisive, dangerous rhetoric. Mika, as you mentioned, making some really lewd comments, the pornographic comments. I mean, this is not what the American people told elected officials, politicians in Washington that they wanted in the 2022 midterms. They told elected officials, we want government to work. We want an effective and efficient government that's fighting for us, that is working on the policies that matter to our American families. This is not what they stood for. And look, you know, I heard you guys talk earlier about President Biden's numbers going up, his approval numbers going up significantly over the past few weeks. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Americans are looking at what the Republicans are saying, and they're saying our top priority is to investigate Hunter Biden's laptop. I think the more and more they try to get these frivolous matters out there and say this is what we want to talk about, meritless matters for that matter, it's only going to make Biden's approval numbers going up because he is delivering for the American people, and that is what people signed up for in the 2022 midterms.
It is Monday, the 12th of December of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, because we do Mondays right after the weekends, and we make a hash, because that's what you do on a Monday after the weekend. How was your weekend? Hope it was fine and well, and that you weren't too snowed in. I know that there were some people who experienced blizzard-like conditions out here on the West Coast. Fortunately, it missed us here in Southern Oregon. Well, at least where the mothership is in Southern Oregon. Eastern part of the state in the there at the California-Nevada border did get quite a bit of weather. And so hopefully everybody is safe and sound. And what else? Oh, I guess, the Keystone Pipeline. It's been leaking. It fouled a creek, a tributary, exactly as people warned them over and over and over. I just wish they had been listened to. Instead, they got their heads bashed in by cops and private security. Because that's how it looks. And then everybody forgets, oh my God, why did they let that pipeline get in there? Well, you know, some people were complaining about it, and they got their heads bashed in by cops and private security. So, it's an American tradition, actually. Mm-hmm. Well, what else is happening? Is there still a nuclear threat? I think that I heard or I read that Putin was still rattling that saber. But no one cares. Who listens to that guy anymore? Oh, speaking of which, Elon Musk. I don't know how I make this association, but you'll figure it out. Anyway, Elon Musk was booed at the Dave Chappelle show in San Francisco for almost 5 minutes. I saw a couple of clips of varying lengths, and the longest one was almost 5 minutes, and it was not, it kind of like kept going. There was not much of a let up. And he circled the stage a little bit, mic in hand, by the way. And people just booed him. I guess he's now experiencing a difference of opinion. I wonder how he likes it. I know how he likes it. He's going to have every single one of those people in that auditorium banned from Twitter. And he has a way of finding out. Mm-hmm. He's got it. He's got the info. He's got everybody's info. You ever make a transaction on PayPal? He's got you. Trust me. Which brings me to another pet peeve. I don't know why people like Morning Joe and Mika and their business people all say that this guy's got such a great mind. He creates things. He has not ever created anything, unless you want to think that he and Peter Thiel created a pseudo bank. That's not really creating anything. It's already like there, called PayPal, but he has never created anything. He hasn't done anything at Tesla except, put his people at risk because he's an anti-vaxxer. Jeez. He doesn't do anything at SpaceX. He bought it. He bought Tesla. The two people who created Tesla pretty much got kicked out because, they couldn't stand Musk. They let it be known. Yeah. And who knows? I suggest that one way to rectify these problems, I would say, is to pretty much, we can boycott Tesla, which is happening. Their stock is tanking. Sales are down. And nationalize SpaceX, fold it into NASA as it should be. If you want to deal with private contractors, do it like it was before. I mean, we all got used to, everybody's lives in the hands of the lowest bidder. Okay? We went to the moon on that. I'm not suggesting that we endanger the lives of our people. But we don't need some demagogue at the public coffers pretending that he's Major Tom. Okay? Of course, I don't know. On the other hand, it would be kind of nice to put him in a can and put him up in space and say, "Hi, Major Tom, can you hear us?" That would be nice. Send him off to Mars. He wants to go there. Actually, I don't know if he really wants to go there, but he wants to send some people there. Yeah, okay. So they can be irradiated. We came here from Mars because Mars is a shithole. It's a hellhole. We want to go back? There's nothing there for us. Not even a magnetosphere. Why don't we get to a rocky planet that has a magnetosphere? Nice bodies of water and, a bit of land, too. That would be nice. No, we want to go to an irradiated to a crisp planet. We'll be able to find water in between the molecules of other substances. That'll be nice. How will we get that? Well, if we were tardigrades, we might be able to. Might. Okay. That was far-flung, wasn't it? Yes, it was. So, you know what? Actually, we do have a bit of some long reads here on this fabulous River City Hash Monday. So why don't we give you a rundown on what we have for you in store, or in store for you. I'll get it out. It's Monday. And of course at the top, Marjorie Taylor Greene said during a New York Young Republicans Club event over the weekend that January 6 protesters would have been armed if she and Steve Bannon had been in charge of organizing it. Well, I got to tell you, not only that statement, but these young Trumpenjungen, Nazi-Jungen, are actually calling for an all-out insurrection. Insurrection 2.0. They want, and I quote, total war. Now, I remember back in the day when a bunch of long-haired hippie types, or I don't know, I would sometimes call them smelly Trotskyites, because that's what they were. They were Trotskyites. And they smelled. I'm sorry, but they just did. Okay, it's not an opinion, it's a fact. You had to be there, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, I don't remember the cops, the FBI, any type of authoritarian agency ever hesitating to, well, I wouldn't say they knocked on a few doors, but they kicked them down. So how is it that these little Nazi jungen can call for all-out war and no one's at least knocking on their doors? It'd be nice if there was a little bit of law and order around here, don't you think? On the rest of the menu, an Oregon lawsuit puts a spotlight on the destruction of black neighborhoods by urban improvement projects and construction of the nation's highways. You know, the kind of thing that is considered to be woke by DeSantis and others. As Arizona Republican Governor Doug Ducey prepares to leave office, he has hired crews to erect hundreds of double-stacked shipping containers topped with razor wire along Arizona's eastern boundary with Mexico. And one of New Hampshire's teachers' unions is suing to stop public dollars from being spent to fund private schools through the Education Freedom Account program. And after the break, we move to the chef's table, where a Russian court sentenced a Putin war critic to 8 years for spreading fake news. And Germany plans to tighten its gun laws in the wake of a plot by the far-right Reichsbürger group to violently overthrow the government. You know, they don't mess around. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left across the page at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, right near the bottom from that chat room link, across to the left once again is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio and possibly send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send that to us once a month, those funds, we're able then to pool that with other like-minded folk, and that helps us pay our bills. And those bills, I got to tell you, every time the bills come in, they charge us a little bit more. What the heck? Well, I guess it's inflation, so they say. Anyway, your help is greatly appreciated, and I have to confess, needed. Because even though the bulk of how we do this comes out of our own wallets, we would still be unable to do it without you. And we thank you for helping us fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, yes, we're still there. You can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter. Yes, indeed, I am still there. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime. And you can find those show notes and links by going to my Twitter feed if you would like to do that. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found. All right, let's see here. This first offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is Out of the Oregonian by Andrew Zelsky. A home that was a fixture of Bobby Fowler's childhood is now a parking lot. The two-story single-sided house having been demolished in the 1970s, along with many other properties in a predominantly black neighborhood of Portland, Oregon. Growing up there was just all about love, Fowler said. Fowler and his sister, Elizabeth Fowler Branch, are now among 26 black people who either lived in the neighborhood or are descendants of former residents and are suing Portland, the city's Economic and Urban Development Agency, and Legacy Emmanuel Hospital, accusing them of the racist destruction of the homes and forced displacement. The lawsuit, filed last week on Thursday in federal court in Portland, shines a light on how urban improvement projects and construction of the nation's highways often came at the cost of neighborhoods that are not predominantly white. In many cases, city and state planners purposely built through black neighborhoods to clear so-called slums and blighted areas, according to a 2020 report by Pew Charitable Trust, a Pennsylvania-based nonprofit public policy group. People who were part of racial minorities were often obligated to live in those neighborhoods because of redlining, banks discriminating against home loan applicants based on race, and even due to laws that maintained all-white neighborhoods. Just don't call it CRT. In 1934, Fowler's great-aunt and her husband bought a house which he and his sister visited almost daily in the Albina neighborhood of Portland, according to the lawsuit. But even after buying homes and building lives in Albina, residents were forced to move by so-called urban renewal and highway building. Albina had already been partially destroyed and carved up in the 50s and 60s by the building of Interstate 5 and Veterans Memorial Coliseum, the original home of the NBA's Portland Trail Blazers. But then, a hospital expansion was announced. Between 1971 and 1973, the Portland Development Commission demolished an estimated 188 properties, 158 of which were residential and inhabited by 88 families and 83 individuals. A total of 32 businesses and 4 church or community organizations were also destroyed. Of the forcible displaced households, 74% were black, according to the lawsuit. A first phase in the 50s and 60s involved city officials secretly agreeing to compensate the hospital for the full cost of the purchases and demolitions. The homeowners were intimidated by hospital representatives, the lawsuit said, and told that if they did not leave, the city would take their homes. They were not fairly compensated and, in some cases, not compensated at all. Much of the land that used to be a thriving neighborhood where black families felt safe and had social and spiritual connections became parking lots or stood vacant. The lawsuit said the defendants are benefiting from unjust enrichment from this horribly racist chapter from Portland's past. Legacy Health, which owns Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center, declined to comment on the lawsuit, saying it is evaluating it. Prosper Portland, formerly the Portland Development Commission, also said it is evaluating the complaint and had no additional comment. City officials did not respond to a request for comment. Albina is now called the Elliott neighborhood, and it now boasts trendy shops, cafes, and eateries. Anita Snow and Ross D. Franklin of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Work crews have steadily erected hundreds of double-stacked shipping containers topped with razor wire along Arizona's remote eastern boundary with Mexico in a bold show of border enforcement. Is that what they're calling it? By Republican Governor Doug Ducey, even as he prepares to leave office. Until protesters slowed, then largely halted the work in recent days, Ducey pressed forward over the objections of the U.S. government, environmentalists, and an incoming governor who called it a poor use of resources. Democratic Governor-elect Katie Hobbs said last week she was looking at all the options and has not decided what to do about the containers after her January 5th inauguration. She previously suggested the containers be repurposed as affordable housing, an increasingly popular option for homeless and low-income people. I don't know how much it will cost to remove the containers and what the cost will be, Hobbs said in an interview on Wednesday last week. Federal agencies have told Arizona the construction on U.S. land is unlawful and ordered it to halt. Ducey responded by October 21st by suing federal officials over their objections, sending the dispute to court. Environmental groups say the containers could imperil natural water systems and endangered species. A lot of damage could be done here between now and early January, said Russ McSpadden, a Southwest conservation advocate for the Center for Biological Diversity, who has regularly traveled to the site since late October. Ducey insists Arizona holds sole or shared jurisdiction over the 60-foot strip the containers rest on and has a constitutional right to protect residents from imminent danger of criminal and humanitarian crises. The federal agencies want Ducey's complaint dismissed. Border security was a focus of Trump's presidency and remains a potent issue for Republican politicians because xenophobia and racism and bigotry sells. Associated Press staff bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The leader of one of New Hampshire's teachers' unions is suing to stop public dollars from being spent to fund private schools through the Education Freedom Account program. The lawsuit in Merrimack County Superior Court this week seeks an injunction to stop the voucher-like program that began last year, contending it violates the New Hampshire Constitution. Deb Howes, president of the American Federation of Teachers New Hampshire, said the program runs afoul of the Constitution because money from New Hampshire's Education Trust Fund is specifically set aside for public education and cannot be used for private purposes. The state specifically earmarked this money for public education. Instead, the state is stealing from public school students in plain sight to pay for its private voucher program, she said in a statement. Senate President Jeb Bradley, a Republican from Wolfboro, accused the union of trying to block a successful program that's helping low-income students get the best education possible, and that is a lie. In this reporter's opinion, of course. The number of participants roughly doubled this fall, with 3,025 New Hampshire students qualifying for grants totaling nearly $14.7 million this school year, according to state officials. The New Hampshire program is open to any private school, including, oh my God, religious ones. Neighboring Maine and Vermont also have opened up their private tuition programs to religious schools, because what better way to get rid of public education, huh? The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in June that Maine could not exclude religious schools from its program that offers tuition aid for private educations for students who live in towns without a public school. Earlier this month, the Vermont Agency of Education and several school districts settled lawsuits over similar policy. Well, that harkens something that we better get riled up about. And I think a lot of us already are. And with that stated, it looks like we should get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, Not Your Father's Ghost Story. The Eternal Daughter is a further collaboration between writer-director Joanna Hogg and actor Tilda Swinton, the two having worked together on The Souvenir and The Souvenir Part 2. The Eternal Daughter, I want to say it's a quiet film, but that's not quite right, because it depends as much on its sounds as its visuals and performances. It's just that it's laconically paced with all this space around its moments. I imagine this feel is helped by Hogg's filmmaking process. She shoots in scene order and has her actors improvise the dialogue, which really works for this story about a mother and a daughter who are spending a long weekend at this Welsh manor house and search for a way to talk to each other. Better to say, it presents itself simply, yet it's really daring. First, it's not totally standalone. Without being a sequel to Hogg's Souvenir movies and being in a different genre, the ghost story, it still features the same mother-daughter characters, but later in their lives, with Swinton playing both parts. Most importantly, though, I don't think it cares about us. I mean, Hogg and Swinton want us to see it, want us to like it, it's very personal for them, but they're not trying to sweep you up with action or dazzle you with effects or beguile you with dialogue, none of the things that movies do to hook. They just want you to sit with it, like this daughter needing to be with her elderly mother. And it's a ghost story. It's got those elements, those filmic conventions, but it's not trying to make you jump or give you chills. And maybe it's a failure at being horror, but it's really the perfect frame to talk about how we're haunted by memories and guilt and regrets and other people alive and dead, and how we're often trapped listening for things that may or may not be there and being unnerved by how both the remembered and the living can remain hazy and indistinct despite us looking directly and searchingly at them. The Eternal Daughter somehow teases out intimate connections while remaining distant and eerily unconcerned with us, as it acts and reenacts its own narrative. Like ghosts. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Ever notice that some music just really makes you want to dance? Well, a new study shows that it is, indeed, all about the bass. Because researchers have found that during a concert, boosting the bass bumps up the boogieing. The results appear in the journal Current Biology.
Music and musical rhythm have been kind of fascinating to me for a long time, since I was a kid. And in particular, the way that they make us feel.
Daniel Cameron is a postdoctoral fellow at McMaster University. He also plays drums.
As a drummer, you're interested in making the crowd want to move and feel good and give a good, pleasurable time feel. And this is related to the work I do in science.
Cameron and his colleagues want to understand how music can engender an almost irrepressible urge to feel our bodies in motion.
And we knew from anecdotal evidence and other experimental evidence that there was an association between bass and dancing.
So people who enjoy electronic dance music, or EDM, report that the thrumming bass produces a sensation that makes them want to move. And some studies have shown that our movements are more fine-tuned when we're locked onto bass notes.
So for example, if you have people tap along to a sequence of tones, their tapping is slightly more accurate. They're more synchronized when those tones are low in frequency compared to high in frequency.
So the researchers set out to determine,
if you add more bass to music, will it cause more dancing?
Now, they didn't want to manipulate the bass line in a way that was obvious, because then people might consciously decide to step up their stepping out.
That might be interesting.
But it would also muddy the results, like if someone in a drug trial knows they're getting the real deal and not a placebo.
So we wanted to do a subtle manipulation, a very consciously undetectable manipulation.
So they broke out a set of very, very low-frequency speakers.
These are specialized speakers, kind of like subwoofers. People might have subwoofers as part of their stereo system, and these are speakers that play even lower frequencies than most systems are able to do. Even lower frequencies than we think are typically able to be heard.
With their special speakers set up, the researchers staged a concert.
We had the electronic music duo Orphix come to our live lab.
That's live, L-I-V-E, for Large Interactive Virtual Environment. It's like a cross between a performance space and a laboratory.
The people who came to the show were fans of the group. They wanted to come and see EDM. They wanted to dance. And while they were there, we asked if they wanted to volunteer in our experiment. And a good number of people signed up.
Recruits adorned themselves with headbands bearing motion capture reflectors, which the researchers used to track their movements.
And then what we did was just, during the concert, turn these very low-frequency speakers on and leave them on for 2.5 minutes, turn them off, leave them off for 2.5 minutes, back on for 2.5 minutes, off for 2.5 minutes, on, off, throughout the concert.
Now, you can't hear when the speakers are switched on. And based on the surveys filled out after the show, and a follow-up study of the manipulated audio clips, neither could the concert-goers. But their feet sure knew something was up.
And what we found was, by looking at the motion capture data, people just moved more. They covered more ground, they moved faster when the low-frequency speakers were on. So this tells us that the extra bass, these very, very low frequencies, cause more moving.
About 12% more moving and grooving. So the concert and the experiment were a success. And best of all,
people enjoyed the concert, and the more people moved, the more they enjoyed the concert.
Which shouldn't be a surprise.
Dancing and pleasure really go hand in hand together. It's something we like to do with music. It's a pleasurable response, and we show with this work that bass is part of that mix.
Next up, Cameron says he'd like to look at whether bass can help bring us together.
So people are more likely to feel good about one another and help one another if they've had some experience synchronizing their movements together. And dance is a great, fun way to do this. And this might be related to why we find dance in all cultures and throughout history for the human species. It's a fundamental part of being human.
So, to cut down on conflict, maybe just crank up the bass and cut up the dance floor. For Scientific Americans, 60 Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkins.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. When it snows this winter, make sure you clear more than your driveway. Before you hit the road and before you get in the driver's seat, check to be sure that your vehicle's tailpipe is clear of snow. If the tailpipe is blocked, carbon monoxide, an odorless, colorless, and deadly gas produced by your engine can build up quickly inside your vehicle, poisoning anyone inside. To learn more, call 1-800-CDC-INFO. That's 1-800-232-4636.
In 2012 in the United States, about 317,000 motor vehicle crashes involved a large truck. 26,000 truck drivers and their passengers were injured in these crashes, and about 700 died. Trucker safety requires an alert, buckled-up, experienced driver with a reliable vehicle and a strong employer safety program. Seatbelts are the most effective way to prevent an injury or death in a motor vehicle crash, but in 2013, 1 in 6 drivers of large trucks didn't use their seat belts. Employers can help truck drivers stay safe by committing to driver safety programs at the highest level of leadership, establishing and enforcing driver safety policies, including requiring everyone in the truck to buckle up, and addressing factors that contribute to crashes, such as drowsy and distracted driving. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
As fall turns to winter, the flu season will be upon us in force. The best way to avoid influenza is to get immunized. Everyone 6 months and older should be vaccinated. Those at increased risk for flu complications include children under the age of 5 and adults 65 and older, people with chronic health problems such as heart disease, asthma, and diabetes, and pregnant women. To get your annual flu vaccine, see your healthcare provider or go to a pharmacy, grocery store, or clinic in your area. If you get influenza, talk with your healthcare provider right away about antiviral medication. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
What does a town bylaw that permits going topless on the beaches teach us about democracy? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In May 2022, Nantucket, Massachusetts passed the Gender Equality on Beaches bylaw. That bylaw does exactly what its name indicates. It allows everyone to go topless on the beaches in that town if they want to. Of course, anyone can wear a top, and everyone is on notice that some people on the beach, regardless of gender, may not be wearing a top. In Massachusetts, new town bylaws are subject to review by the state attorney general to determine if they comply with the state constitution and state law. In early December, the Massachusetts attorney general ruled that the bylaw legally was just fine. As the longtime town resident who proposed the bylaw explained, this is righting a wrong, allowing the space for all bodies to be topless and catching up to what was already legal for men. But it wasn't always so. Indeed, until the late 1930s, it was a crime in most states and cities for men to go topless, to expose their nipples, even on a beach. A crime for men. Obviously, that changed. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis famously wrote that in our federal system, states are the laboratories of democracy. Similarly, for states, local governments, as here, can function as laboratories of democracy and equality. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1964. That was the day that half of the labor force of France ended a strike that had ground the country to a halt. The strike started on December 10th, and it's estimated that 9 million people participated in the work action. Frustration had been growing amongst French working people since the end of World War II. 2 million of the strikers were civil servants. The main issue of the strike was wages for public workers. Workers were angry that their wages wages were being eroded by the ever-increasing rate of inflation. In addition, they wanted their wages to be more competitive with pay rates found in the private sector. Striking workers included pool attendants, garbage collectors, postmen, teachers, and bus and subway drivers. Train service into Paris was effectively halted. The public workers were joined by many in the private sector who could not get to work due to the transportation shutdown, and who were also angry about stagnant and declining wages in the country. Telephone service in the country was silenced. The strike impacted electric power in the country and kept factories idle. Half of the nation's entire power grid was disrupted. The City of Lights had fallen dark, an effective demonstration of the power of labor. The Chicago Tribune reported that many French stores sold out of their year's supply of candles due to the blackout. Some people went to local churches to purchase candles. In many ways, the 1964 strike was a dress rehearsal for even more extensive strikes that were to follow. 4 years later, in May of 1968, 11 million workers went on strike. They were joined by many university students in a call for changes in the French government.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 36 degrees Fahrenheit and quite foggy outside at the moment. And it looks like there's a bit of almost freezing drizzle as well, but we will be cloudy mostly throughout the day. Highs in the mid to low 40s, winds light and variable, then mainly cloudy overnight with lows in the upper 20s, low 30s, winds remaining light and variable, and then partly cloudy skies tomorrow. Highs in the low to mid 40s, winds remaining light and variable, and it looks like we won't have any precipitation or snow, though I consider that to be both the same, until, maybe Monday of next week. So we'll see how that goes. I should mention pollen is still rated as none outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is in the good range, though barely. It's almost moderate because it is standing at 50 parts per million, which is in the upper range of good level. And the daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.06 inches. Visibility is at 1.5 miles. And relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 34 degrees and cloudy with a freeze advisory. Paris is 30 degrees and mostly cloudy, also with a freeze advisory. Rome is 51 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 30 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 35 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 58 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 46 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 45 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York, New York is 36 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Ilya Sheena of the Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Russian court sentenced an opposition politician, Ilya Yashin, to 8 years and 6 months in prison on charges of spreading false information about atrocities by Russian forces in Ukraine. The latest criminal verdict intended to silence critics of Putin's war. Yashin, age 39, posted a YouTube video in April in which he dissected the potential war crimes documented by Western journalists and Ukrainian officials in the city of Bucha near Kyiv in an effort to debunk the official Kremlin line that those reports were staged or fabricated to smear Russia. The Kremlin, in the early days of its invasion, took aggressive steps to suppress criticism of the war by pushing through laws that made it illegal to criticize the military or the government, or even to call the war a war rather than a special military operation with violations punishable by up to 15 years in jail. While there have been dozens of prosecutions, the laws have been enforced selectively to target longtime opponents of Putin, such as Yashin, while pro-war hawks and Kremlin propagandists are allowed to engage in fierce criticism of Russian military commanders who have overseen heavy battlefield losses. Yashin's YouTube video served as the basis of the criminal case initiated against him under the new laws, which also prohibit disseminating what the authorities consider fake news about the Russian military. The threat of long prison sentences and the Kremlin's far-reaching attempts to quash any dissent prompted thousands of Russians to flee the country, but some, like Yashin, decided to stay.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Germany plans to tighten its gun laws in the wake of a suspected plot by a far-right group to violently overthrow the government and install a minor royal as national leader, its interior minister said in an interview published yesterday, Sunday. German police last week arrested 25 people suspected of involvement in the plot, which has shocked many in one of Europe's most stable democracies. Prosecutors allege that many of the suspects were members of the Reichsbürger, or Citizens of the Reich movement, which does not believe in the existence of the modern German state, according to prosecutors. Interior Minister Nancy Faeser, in an interview, said or warned that the Reichsbürger represented a rising threat to Germany, given it had expanded by 2,000 to 23,000 people in the past year. These are not harmless, crazy people, but suspected terrorists who are now sitting in pretrial detention, Faeser was quoted as saying. Prosecutors have said the suspects included individuals with weapons and knowledge of how to use them. They had attempted to recruit current and former army members and had stockpiled weapons. We need all authorities to exert maximum pressure to remove their weapons, Faeser was quoted as saying, which is why the government would shortly further tighten gun laws. Prior to the raids, authorities had already confiscated weapons from more than 1,000 Reichsbürger members. However, at least another 500 are still believed to hold gun licenses in a country where the private possession of firearms is rare. The fact senior civil service members, such as former lawmaker and Berlin judge Birgit Malsk-Winkermann, were among those arrested on suspicion of plotting, has particularly shaken many in Germany. Joachim Löber, the lawyer who defended her in a legal case in October where the Berlin government tried to force her to retire as a judge, declined to comment on her arrest. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tendre, nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tendre, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.